Hey guys, this is Bonfrey from L World. Thanks for joining. This is FOE Advance. And tonight's video, I want to talk about One Up kits and Reno kits and what I did to work through the decision process of how I wanted to use these very valuable kits, being a renovation or a One Up kit, as I grew in the game. They're kind of few and far between, and if you are the type of player that wants to move up quickly, you're going to have to be very conservative, I guess I would say, or measured about which buildings you want to renovate or which buildings you want to one up, depending on what your long-term strategy is. So when I spend a one-up kit or a reno kit, it's a very decisive concern for me at that moment, because it really is that's a microscopic decision in terms of a macroscopic scope of where you're headed. So if you are, say, headed towards FE and you decided that that's where you're going to camp for a while, you're going to have a different strategy to renovate certain buildings than, say, if you were going to treat FE as a skid mark on your way to SAM or whatever. So I'm not here to tell you what the best strategy is and what the best era is to renovate which buildings. You kind of need to figure that out. But I will show you how I worked, through some of that to figure it out. But the key being, if you are going slow, you want to think about some years force you to go slow, right? Like if you are in FE and say you're planning to be there for a while, I recommend being in FE for quite some time. Just because it's a fun era, everything comes together in terms of your recurring quests. You get all three RQs. It's a happy balance, and you get hovers, and you could just live in FE for, as long as this game exists and still be in good shape. However, if you are, interested in moving ahead into other eras, that's a whole other strategy. So if I'm going to be in one era, based on the research I've done and what I know about it, I always try to research the eras before I go, before I start applying renovation kits. Renovation kits are obviously, well, maybe not obviously, they're more valuable than one-up kits. However, they both have their role. So a one-up kit can be very handy if you're like, hey, I want to renovate this abandoned asylum from, say, contemporary era, if you had it out there, right? But now you're in future era and you want it to produce goods, from future era. You're there now. You want it to have the max benefit of the attack percentage and the forge points and things like that. So what you may or may not know, I'm going to use the abandoned asylum as an example, is that by era, and I'll link this is the Forge of Empires fandom page. I constantly used to refer to this as I was aging up, right? Because if you intentionally leave a building in a previous era, you may want to do that. If it's a goods bearing building, earlier eras obviously have lower amounts of everything, right? If it's forge points, most likely in an early era it produces less forge points. In an early era it produces less coins, less supplies, whatever it is that the building rewards. But the goods can be a major consideration in whether you want to age up a given building, right? So if we go to level 9 up here, this is important to look at the tiers. So in the case of my level 9 abandoned asylums, I can go here and I can see what I'm either gaining or not gaining based on the era of the building, right? So if I had picked up a level 9 abandoned asylum in this time frame, LMACA, I would have, 18% defense while attacking. But and then of course the related other metrics, right? Whether it's coins or supplies, goods. So what this is saying is that no matter what era you're in, it's going to produce 20 goods. And no matter what area you're in, it's going to produce 11 forge points, right? So let's say now I find myself in future. Well, if I reno this, I can jump from, say I got it in LMA, I could jump from 18 to 22% if I use a reno kit, right? That would give me a benefit of a percentage, but it also is going to put my goods production. It's going to add goods to my inventory that are based on my current era. So if I leave this asylum back in, say, LMA, it's going to pop 20 LMA goods every day, right? Now you may want that building to do that. Maybe you need LMA goods for a certain reason, or maybe you need CA goods. So you're like, well, I currently have an LMA abandoned asylum and my guild needs a lot of, I don't know, PE, right? So if you're sitting in FE, you can't use a reno kit if you want to produce PE because you're already up here, right? So what you might do is use a couple of one-up kits to get it to PE so that you're like, hey, I want PE goods. I want this building to be more of a focus on PE goods. So this dynamic gets pretty deep and somewhat complicated depending on how you want to play the game. I'm not going to say there's one way or the best way to do any of this. You need to look at what buildings you want to put down in your empire to give you that max benefit, right? Like, so in the case of slave builders, like I love slave builders because I can have different eras of these, right? Like I can have one back in, maybe, industrial, right? If I picked it up then, but if I reno it or if I one up it, I can't go backwards. I thought it was kind of interesting that the devs have never come out with an opposite of a reno kit, whatever that would be, right? A de-escalation kit or whatever. So you're like, hey, no, I renoed this thing to Space Age Jupiter Moon, but I want to take it back to FE, right? You can only go forward with reno kits and one-up kits. So you really want to choose wisely depending on how your gameplay plan lays out, right? So, I thought it was cool that the Golden Aurea came out and it gives you shards of one-up kits. That was fairly new, for someone who's been playing the game forever. Also fragments of one-up kits on the Golden Crops. So various buildings have come along that give you these one-up kit advantages. Still haven't seen renovation kits come out in any of the special buildings. There might have been one, but I don't think so. The best place to pick up rental kits is, of course, to level up your TOR and play GE. I pick up a ton of renovation kits there, but you have to get up to GE 3 and 4 to really, for those rare ones to come out. And they're great, but then you end up with an inventory problem and a map problem, right? So it all depends on where you're at. I mean, there's some things about the game right now about Inno's posture in the market in terms of like how they're testing advertising and some other things that are irritating me about how they're kind of screwing with stuff. But, when you boil it down, the guts of the game are still very much there. And if I were to go type in Reno, I've been very conservative with how I've deployed Reno kits. Oh my God. Yeah. So now I have 108 because I've been sitting in this era forever, right? Like, I mean, sorry, I didn't even mean to like, oh yeah, I have 108. I mean, normally as I was working myself up to, the highest era at this point, I was dealing with like, well, I scrimped and scraped and I have 22 reno kits or I have 14 reno kits or whatever. And say I was going from future era to AF. Well, you want to look at AF and think, how long do I want to be in AF? What does that era look like? Do your research. Look at other videos that maybe I post or other people post, or anything you can find in the wiki about AF, because you don't want to burn reno kits or one up kits in an era that you're not going to stay in for a while, in my opinion. Now you can speed up your research in a given era by renovating your abandoned asylums or your goods buildings, your slave builders or whatever. You can obviously build goods buildings from that age, but those are going to be inefficient, in terms of their land space, because, they do that on purpose, right? Like, okay, you need a 2-lane road, and then, when you get up to the higher eras, etc. So I think what I'm trying to communicate is that you want to pick your key eras that, based on talking to other players, watching videos, or whatever you're interested in. It could be the aesthetic of the era that you want to pursue. It could be that you're like, no, I just want to get to the top, but I want to get there as fast as I can. So it's going to change how many of those reno kits you're going to use, right? Like, so if I look at the gingerbread bakeries, they produce some stuff, right? Like goods, FP, supplies, etc. But if I'm way down low, like say I picked up a gingerbread bakery in Iron Age and now I'm in PE, well, it can make a big difference in terms of those supplies you need to do your research, or the forge points you need. All this stuff becomes less and less painful when you get to higher eras. But when you're, colonial, you're progressive, modern era, you need a ton of supplies. You need a lot of forge points. You need goods, just the nails, basic stuff to be able to get through that era, do the research. So you may, if you have a number of, say, these, bakeries, or you have a number of asylums, you may want to stagger them. So you're like, well, I want to save a reno kit until I really want to like hit whatever era, right? CE. Like say I want to hit CE, I'm gonna hold off on spending my renos and my one ups until I hit CE, and then I'm like, okay, I'm in CE for a while. I'm gonna reno a bunch of stuff, and then I'm gonna hang out for a while, and then get more reno kits. So I very rarely have burned all my reno kits in one era. Like say I have 10 and I go to the next era and I'm like, well, like I think it's important for you to look ahead and see which eras you think you're going to be in for a while. Now, there's eras that you want to be in for a while, and there's eras that force you to be in them for a while, no matter how long you want to be in them. Future. So as we get past, the reason I'm bringing up higher eras, like say future and above, is that those eras start to get pretty lengthy to get through in terms of research, and you have a special good, whether it's orichalcum in oceanic future or promethium in arctic future, and then it goes on and on, right, as you get into the space eras. But the point being that, I mean, you hit future era, you're at the pinnacle of not needing the special good from any of these harbors, right? These aren't on an FE map, right? Like the oceanic terminal, the Arctic harbor, the spaceport. None of those exist in future era, and it's like the biggest thing you have to deal with is 2-lane roads, right? And it's still just a very good era. So I think I hung out. Now the game is different now, but like in my case, years ago, I hung out in Future for like a year, right? And I still think that's viable, doable. So I burned most of my Reno and One Up kits in to just stay in Future and produce Future, but and that was before GBG was a thing. So now that GBG is a thing, guilds need lower era goods in many cases, and to the degree that they may say, well, we're a hardcore guild battlegrounds guild and we won't take any players that are lower than, say tomorrow era or whatever have you, right? Because they just don't have enough people producing lower era goods to pay for the special buildings, they give you the discounts on GBG, right? So your forts and things like that. So, again, there's a lot of different ways to play the game. So in Future, I hung out a long time. I burned a lot of Reno kits, and that was great. Built up more by playing and playing and playing. And then I went to Arctic Future and, realized that it was, there were very few YouTube videos at the time and not very many people telling you like, Arctic Future is just a very short era. The fighting troops blow, and they do. You figure it out for yourself, and you're like, wow, this is, so you don't, like, there's certain eras, in my opinion, you need to sum it up, and you do the research and listen to maybe my voice, but maybe other people's voices. Like, I've yet to meet one person who's like, oh, Arctic Future is badass, and like, no, it just blows. It's like, it's just a skid mark on the way to the next thing, right? So when you get past Arctic Future and you get to OF, now you're like, oh shit, this is like, I'm going to be here for like 13 months or something because the map is huge. The research is huge. You're completely held back by the production of orichalcum, which takes forever. And it's just, I'm not saying it's bad. There's some upsides of OF. And what I did, my own experience was I renoed and one upped about half of my special buildings, whether it's like the Wonder Wheels or the especially like I would pinpoint, I'd build spreadsheets. I'm like, okay, this one produces 33 goods, right? Fiore Village, 33 goods. Okay. So I'm like, yeah, I want to have enough goods of my current era so that I don't have to do a bunch of trade downs, saves me time. Maybe I'll put this one, into that current era. Maybe, this, that, you just need to look at all the stuff you have in your city and make sure you're maximizing the right buildings based on what your growth strategy is, because this game is about growth. And if, you're not growing, you're dying, so to speak. I mean, you can farm this thing, but like, I don't know how much fun that really ends up being. So, oh, by the way, there's keyboard shortcuts. So I hit 6 when I'm going to reset all my sleigh builders, production buildings. It's kind of a quick shortcut thing on if you're playing on PC, or not just PC, that's just browser, right? So anyway, that's just a side note. But you want to look at like, okay, if I'm going to be in this era for a year, right? OF being one of them. Probably OF is probably the longest research era that exists to get through. So, you want to do your research on that, and then you get into virtual future. Cool era goes kind of fast like AF did, but it's like way better than AF. And you're like, well, maybe I'll reno some of these buildings. So what I did is I did a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Didn't use everything as I was moving up through OF. I kind of went deeper on OF, and then VF, Virtual Future. Those goods were really popular at the time, so I renovated a ton of stuff in VF, even though it was a fairly short era, because I could sell those goods, because that's when the Himeji had just come out. Not as hot of a commodity now, because when you're tracking with the highest era, there's other motives and reasons that you may want to renovate and make more goods. So, again, you've got to weigh all that stuff. So I guess what I'm getting at is that you don't want to just blatantly try to reno every building or one up every building based on where you're at. Or I just got here, so I need to have enough reno kits to like bump everything up, or enough one up kits to bump everything up. I think you want to look really closely at each building, what it gives you, and weigh that against your strategy. Like, why would I upgrade a fire pagoda if I'm like really looking at goods? Like, see, I have a fire pagoda still sitting in Space Age Venus, even though I'm in Jupiter Mars, because I still like to have a few buildings that produce stuff from Space Age Venus. So I'm just leaving it there. Like, I don't really care about the rest of it, the forge points or this or that. I just get, for this building, I get, 10 goods of Space Age Venus every day, right? Because I left it there. I left it in the past. So there can be reasons. You want to sum it up. You want to think it through. And, there's no perfect model. There's no like, oh, I'm telling you this is what you should do. It's like you want to think it through. And honestly, it helps you have a more critical eye to your growth plan in the game. And there's a lot of situations where you don't know what you don't know, right? You're like, well, maybe when I, age up, like we all get the kind of the butterflies. You're like, well, all right, I just did the final thing in the research, and now I'm in OF, and I can't go back. And then you don't realize if you're going to love that or hate it or whatever, but you're there and you can't back it up, So I would recommend in any case, when you get to an era and then you start to realize the actual weight and the reality of where you are at, you want to weigh that. And you're like, hey, I dig this, or this blows. So if you dig it, then maybe you renovate or one up more buildings. If it blows, then you're like, well, I want to fight this and I want to get the heck out of this era. And then you don't blow as many reno kits and one up kits because, you're kind of like, I want to get to the next thing and then maybe stay there for a while, So anyhow, there's other videos, there's other strategies, depending on if you're a fighter, there's going to be eras that are just universally better for fighting, right? Like really great fighting eras. And I probably should do a video on like my favorite fighting eras. If you're a resource person and you like to sell, your strategy is, I want to sell goods for forge points. What are the most popular eras to sell goods? Then you want to focus your strategy on the goods buildings that relate to what you can trade for the most forge points, right? For the buildings that are most popular among other players. So, there's a million ways to go in this decision, but I'll say that reno kits and one-up kits have been the single most like big question mark exclamation point for me in my slow growth over time as to, what do I want to do when? And the main thing I can say about that, the main piece of advice I can share is to give yourself time. So once you get into an era, don't just like blanket reno everything, burn up all your reno kits or your one-up kits, whatever. Give it some time and see if you like it, see if it makes sense, and then you're like, okay, this kind of sucks, so I'm going to hold back, and I'm just going to hold on. Maybe you don't know what you're waiting for, right? Maybe you don't know that like 2 or 3 eras ahead of you is when you really want to burn those upgrade kits, right? Now, there is one thing I should mention, which especially has to do with statue SOHs, but really just about any building that has upgrades. So, the highest abandoned asylum is a level 9, right? The highest wonder wheel is your whatever. The wonder wheel is a wonder wheel. So it's probably like a 10, it's like the 10th version of that upgraded thing. So the point being, as you go up, so what I've done is sometimes, if I know I'm going to age up, So say I got an abandoned asylum level 7, right? And I'm in Sam, right? And so I have a level 7 Sam abandoned asylum. Well, I can, but yet I have like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 upgrade kits left for the asylum. I'll hold off to upgrade it because as soon as you, like, whatever era you're in, if you upgrade a building, whether it's an abandoned asylum, assuming it's not at the top, if it's at the top, you're jacked. I mean, you can't do what I'm talking about right now. But Olympic Treasury, same thing. SOH is a really popular one. So say I had a level, again, the AA is 7 or the SOH is 7. I might purposely hold off on applying the next level, the upgrade kit, because I can jump eras with that. So say my SOH was VF and I forgot about it or I left it there. I'm like, oh shit, this thing's like still in VF. If I wasn't at the top, level 8, and I was still at a 7, I could apply, and now I'm in Spacey's Jupiter Moon, I could apply an SOH upgrade kit and it would bump it to my current era. So it's like a cheat for a reno kit, and it will upgrade to your current era, no matter what era the previous iteration of it is, assuming you're not at the top. So being that I'm at level 8 here and I'm at the highest here, I can't do that anymore. Like I can't put an abandoned asylum, level 10, upgrade kit. So I will often plan ahead, withhold upgrade kits, keep these buildings purposely at a lower level because I know where I'm going, and then I apply the upgrade kit, and then it automatically renovates it. So it saves me a reno kit, and it gets the building where I want it to be. And you're like, well, I don't really know. Is it worth it to reno this building? Forget about the goods. What about FP? What about attack percentage? What about whatever, blah, blah, blah? Well, that's where you go over to the wiki and you look. You're just like, well, I'm looking for X. Say I'm looking for, defensive attacking. Well, I mean, if my AA is level 9 and back in LMA, I'm getting an 18% attack, defensive attacking. Whereas if I renoed it, or I had an upgrade kit, if it was lower than a 9, I could apply it, and now I'm jumping up here to 24% for these eras, if I'm in these eras, right? Any of these spreads. So you have, basically, they space it out, right, to where you have these spreads of eras. And of course you get, some buildings you get more FP, like let me think here, I'm freestyling a little bit here, but like if you were to look up oh crap, what is it, the thing that, like, checkmate square. All right, so I don't know this interface now anymore. Checkmate square, that one's a little bit weird, right? Because when you click on it, you're like, what the hell does this thing do? Like, it doesn't really tell you. But the CMS, see here, defensive attacking, it changes as you era up, right? Now, you may still have, a CMS from EMA, and it's giving you 6%, defensive attacking. Well, if you're up in SAV and you haven't looked at that, you can almost double your percentage of, defensive attacking. So it's important to keep an eye on that stuff. And, this is just one small example of, so many special buildings are tied to era output that it's really important to keep an eye on it, because you may be sitting on a potential gold mine, and if you're not, renovating or one-upping, and you're just not paying attention to it, you could be cutting yourself short, because again, this game's all about real estate. And, I've bought all of the diamond possible space. Like I'm landlocked, right? And if I go to my inventory, like, I have to make choices, and it kills me, right? Because I have event buildings in here. I got 4 Stage of Ages just sitting around, but it's a 4x4. Like, I don't have room for that in my town. TA Army, I got 2 Terracotta Army level 8s just sitting in inventory. I'm not bright. It's like, this is not a good problem to have, right? Because it's like, I have so much stuff that's cool. I mean, a Gentile windmill, I put that in storage for the event, and then I'll put that back out. But, Ryosi tracks, uh, I mean, I'm, kind of suffering from a problem of excess, but at the same time, it pains me because, you're either striving for these buildings or then you get them and you're like, I don't have any fucking room for these buildings. So that's what's great about this game, right? It's a resource situation, and it's a land space thing. And, you got to play it the way you want to, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of elites that, don't have any sleigh builders in their city, but I like sleigh builders. So, like, that's what I'm doing, right? Whatever, so you kind of have your little thing or whatever you're doing. But, like, at some point I might delete my Kraken, because the Kraken is like, it only works for the first 23 battles, right, to do its thing at its current level. I don't like buildings, if I can have the luxury of choosing now where I'm at, of things that are taking up space in my town, I want buildings that work all the time for what they do. This is why the AO is such a critically important building, because it always works. It doesn't run out of charges, right? It doesn't ever stop providing, in my case, a 33.42% chance of dealing 150% damage. It doesn't do it for the first 12 attacks, the first 5 attacks, the first 20 attacks. It does it all the time. Whereas the Kraken runs out of steam after a certain number of attacks, and there are other buildings that are limited as well, based on the benefit they provide. I don't like those. That's why I don't have a Virgo. And they stunted the Virgo early on. That's a whole thing. That's locked in history at this point. But they got so many complaints, because the Virgo, they allowed it to be a benefit for PvP, and then whining and crying and moaning. They killed the PvP benefit of it, and it only works for fighting against the AI. So that's fine, but I mean, like, that building became of no interest to me. But again, like, buildings that are most valuable work all 100% of the time, 100% of the time, not 100% of the time, 50% of the time, kind of thing, to quote a Ron Burgundy kind of situation there. So so I'm going to be looking closely at deleting buildings that are they just run out of steam after a certain number of attacks, because if I'm attacking, like, I'm not attacking, like, the Kraken, like, this building came out of OF, right? Like, this was a time when there was no guild battlegrounds. There were no PvPs, tournaments. There were a lot of things that didn't exist when this building came out. And to limit, at a level 75 building GB, so I've pumped thousands, tens of thousands of FP into this thing, and I only get the benefit of a first strike for the first 23 battles. It's stupid. I mean, it really is. Like, I should just delete it. So probably will. It's just irrelevant right now. I mean, to me, like, I could put something else here in this space that would give me a continuous benefit. But anyway, this video is about renos and one-ups and how to approach that. So I hope it's been helpful. This is the first video in a while. I'm going to try to do more, faster, better, more. And thanks for listening, watching, and let me know, post comments. Glad to get help out there, answer questions however I can. Subscribe, hit the ding thing or whatever it is, and I'll see you on the next one. Cheers.